I'm allowed to announce this, I guess. Dear Colin, I'm delighted to inform you. I mean, you've read this, Rudy. You're not going to get me in trouble, are you?
Read the first half.
Read the first half. This is confirmed to be my privilege. So I believe that means I can say this. This is public knowledge now. Okay. So we've received an email from from Larry Tabak that indeed President Biden announces that he intends to nominate Dr. Monica Berginoli as the 17th NIH director. So that was what you read about in the news, and that's great. And just as a reminder, I'm going to look at any who want to fill in anything. So this means he intends to nominate her. This does require both a Senate hearing and a Senate confirmation. And I can't imagine that can happen in anything less than a month or two, probably, right? I'm just sort of seeing nods back there. I mean, I guess we don't really know what the timing might look like. But that is now public news. And I didn't have it in my director's report. Boy, that would have been really cool. So in any case, that's wonderful, and we're delighted that that is happening. And stay tuned on how quickly all this actually gets implemented.
Charles, you want to come up, please?
Yeah, Charles can come up. And while Charles is getting ready, let me frame what we are going to do now on either side of lunch. So let me remind those who are watching, and certainly the council members know this, that the council of NHGRI are responsible for, their primary responsibility is giving advice and input about our and some responsibilities for our extramural research program. I certainly use council for other things as well, other things we want input about, even if it's not strictly in the extramural program. The other major advisory body of the Institute is a board of scientific counselors, and they are specifically constituted and have the responsibility to provide very detailed oversight and regular review of our intramural research program. And they, when I was looking around the council members, the only council member I think currently who has served on our board of scientific counselors in the past is Nancy Cox. And ironically, in addition to doing that, she also served on the last time the intramural program had one of these once-in-a-decade reviews that you're going to hear about. So Nancy's very familiar with this process and is very familiar with our intramural research program. What we are here today to talk about is this once-in-a-decade review of the intramural research program. That is required by NIH policy to happen roughly once in a decade. And there are a number of things that have to happen for that review, but it's left a lot to the discretion of the Institute director to do that, to exactly formulate how they want to do it. And the way I have chosen to do it now twice since I became director was to use the council involvement and this format of an open session to make this very publicly available. And I've even gone as far as both times actually using council members to help chair it. And so a year ago, and I've mentioned this a year ago, but a year ago I had Gail Jarvik and Lynn Jordy agreed to serve as co-chairs of this special blue ribbon panel that was assembled. It actually included some board of scientific counselor members to be highly informative. It included some former council members, and it included other just great people. And you'll see a roster of that later. And they've spent the year kicking the tires, is what I would say. Not on the ground of worrying about individual investigator research projects, much more high-level, 30,000-foot view. And their report is now public on genome.gov. And after lunch, Lynn and Gail will present the recommendations and the summary of this one-year blue ribbon panel process. So that's that. Now, meanwhile, Charles Rotimi came on in the middle of the pandemic as our new scientific director, the director of our intramural research program, because Dan Kastner, who had previously been the scientific director, wanted to step down from that position and return full-time to his lab. And the other thing that happens normally is every couple of years or so, we always like to have the scientific director come to council and just give an update so they know what's going on the other side of the Institute. And I purposely delayed bringing Charles here because I knew this blue ribbon panel was going to come, and I thought it'd be most informative to have you hear from Charles the first time in front of council just before we hear from the Blue Ribbon Panel Report. And by the way, all this was just by sheer timing, and in some ways it was accidental, that Dan Kastner was roughly in SD for about 10 years, and shortly after he became scientific director, we did a Blue Ribbon Panel review. So it made a lot of sense that when Charles took over as scientific director, having that Blue Ribbon Panel review come in was really very helpful to him, and I thought this choreographed so nicely. So that brings us to today. So now you're going to hear Charles. I'm not even going to give you a bio introduction about Charles because I asked Charles to do that because I think he tells his story better than I do. So the first part of his talk will be telling us about himself and his journey to his current position as scientific director. Then there's a lunch break. And then after the lunch break, the first thing we'll hear will be from Gail and Lynn giving us a summary about the Blue Ribbon Panel report. Okay, everybody knows the context. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Charles Rotimi.